Hi, everyone. This is Illy, and today I'm excited to welcome back Dr. AnnaLynn Schooley. You probably remember her from our chat about therapy, the art and science of therapy as craft, earlier on the blog. And today we're going to take that discussion a step further and talk about how to craft questions. So we talked about initially in our first conversation, we talked about how to move from being a novice to being a master therapist. And today we're going to get into the details of that a bit by talking about some of the types of questions that we craft and how we can hone that craft. Dr. Schooley, thanks for being here.
My pleasure. My pleasure. So yeah, last time we talked about kind of the joining aspects of doing therapy, and my belief that we often in our zeal to help people, that we sometimes get carried away and want to move right into intervening before we've really had a chance to get to know the client, to really establish joining with them. And that's when we talked about validating, empathizing, summarizing, back channeling, interrupting, all of those different kinds of things. So once one is joined, then it's time to start asking questions. There's lots of different resources that one can look at for possible questions. There's a couple of really great articles that I'll be happy to, that I'm sure you have. The evolution of the circular question is one of my favorites. But there's other stuff out there, 1001 solution-focused questions, and of course, any case study. I mean, when I was learning how to be a therapist, I would just devour case studies in every way I could, anything that had transcript in it, so I could see what these therapists were actually saying, and so I could copy them. My favorite, one of my favorites, is the Milan Systemic Family Therapy book, because it's got transcripts of entire sessions, so I could see exactly what those Italian fellows were saying, Cecchine and Boscolo. You can look at questions in a very, very fine, detailed way. I've kind of distilled it down to 4 basic types. That everything else kind of, for me, falls into these 4 basic types. The first type is the yes/no question, right? Okay. And you need yes/no questions. You need them. You need to be able to get yes or no. Do you want to save your marriage? Yes or no, right? It's like, where are we going? It's for me, yes/no questions are the fork in the road, right? Which way are we going? Right?
So what's commonly referred to as the close-ended question. I like the term yes or no question, because I think close-ended kind of gives it that negative.
It does have kind of a negative connotation. Yeah, it does. It does. And open questions really ought to be storytelling questions. Invite you to tell me a story. But yeah, I mean, that's what probably people have heard as closed questions, open questions. And there are, other than yes/no questions, there's also closed questions that are like single answer. How many sisters do you have? Are you married? Is it yes, no? I mean, these are the kinds of things that you need to kind of establish some basic information. The stray thought that went by is they're like the newlywed questions, the newlywed game, right? In terms of how well do you know your partner, these kind of, what kind of pie do they like, and their favorite color, and this kind of just little detail information that I think sometimes we ignore their usefulness, and we ignore the information. But I think that gathering that data can be really useful later at some point when you start trotting out the fancier questions. Because if you're going to ask a relational or a circular question, and you don't know if they have sisters or not, then you don't know that you can populate your world with those people when you ask those fancier questions. So okay. It's good to know that kind of stuff. What is problematic is if you listen to people converse just in everyday language. You'll find that it's mostly those closed type, yes, no, single answer kinds of questions. That's what most people converse in. And I think that we sometimes don't craft our questions very carefully because clients will answer with a story, essentially a closed question. So the most common type that I see early interns doing is, do you think blah, blah, blah is so? Well, that's a yes, no question. If you really listen to it, do you think yes or no, right? And if the client is being a smart ass, they'll say yes or no. But usually they want to be helpful, so they'll tell you a story. But it means that our questions are not very specific. It's like my issue with the word feel. So how do you feel about that? I will slap the wrist of the intern who asked that kind of question, unless they actually want to know a feeling response.
Right.
But if you're just saying how do you feel about that because you can't think of anything better to say, or you're filling the air, or you're being lazy and not crafting questions, then that's being lazy. It's not being really mindful of what you're saying. So anyway, so closed questions of the type are yes, no, and single answer. And then the two fancier kinds of the relational and the circular. Okay. So the relational question is when you are asking someone to stand in the shoes of and look out at the eyes of another person. And you have to be careful how you craft that, because if I say, so Illy, what do you think your husband would say about blah, blah, blah? I'm asking your opinion. Mm-hmm. And that's a direct question I'm asking of you. So that's a direct, open question. What do you think he would say? Mm-hmm. But if I say, if he were here, what would he tell us about blah, blah, blah? I'm forcing you to stand in his shoes. Mm-hmm. Now, in reality, it's still going to be your opinion. It's still going to be based on your experience. But there's a subtle shift in thinking when I ask you to stand in their shoes.
It's like, yes, I see it as you have to use your knowledge, your true, like, intimate knowledge of that person, not just it implies that you're going to consider them in your answer.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's as you were talking about in one of our previous conversations about how you hallucinate people in, you're almost inviting that client to hallucinate a new experience as someone
absolutely
else.
Or to hallucinate to reach back into their experiences of that person and what would they say. Mm-hmm. Right, as opposed to what do I think about them, right? So what would they say, right? So I don't know why this is, but this is a tough thing for new interns to get. That subtle shift between what do you think they'd say and if they were here, what would they say? So you're right, it's that hallucinating them in piece. Absolutely.
But can new therapists get it? Or is it something
absolutely.
that it's, okay.
I mean, anybody can get it. It's practice. But so the closed questions, yes, no's, and simple answers, you'll hear that in conversation every day with people all the time. Mm-hmm. All the time, right? These kinds of relational and circular questions, they could happen in everyday conversation. They just don't, because they're much more obviously therapy type questions. And not only that, but they're much more systemic marriage and family therapy kind of questions. When I did a role play that was taped for where I teach, my role players were two mental health counselors playing father and daughter. And I would ask these circular questions and they would answer and they played nice with me and all that kind of stuff. And at the end of it, when we were finished taping, they went, where did you get those questions? Those were they're long time professionals working in the field, their respective fields, very, very long time. But they had never heard these kind of questions. Mm-hmm. This idea of asking someone to stand in someone else's shoes and make that a therapeutic thing.
Right.
So, and of course, I will have people do that even when the person we're talking about is in the room. So your dad is here, so let me ask you, what's he going to tell me when I ask him blah, blah, blah? And then I can turn to dad and ask a direct question of how close was she?
Yeah. How'd she do?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So a new therapist would look at this and say, oh, good, I'm gathering all this lovely content. This is true. You are gathering lovely content. But more importantly, you're gathering information, contextual information about the relationship.
Right. You're gathering dynamics.
And that's what makes our work as MFTs different. Because content is nice, but the relationship is more important. Because the content constantly changes. It's the relationship patterns that we're most interested in. And usually where, if things aren't working, that's where it's not working, not in the content.
Sure. So this idea that the more you can use relational and circular questions, the more information you're gathering, even just with one question.
Absolutely.
You're gathering a lot of information at different levels of the system, content, process. And
the Milan people would say that every question is an intervention, or at least is the potential to be an intervention. So you don't have to dream up all this homework and stuff for them to go do and exercises, and you don't have to dream any of that stuff up. You just have to ask good questions. And what I mean by good questions is well-crafted, utilizing client language, being aware of what is it you're wanting, what part of this system are you interested in.
Right, intentional.
So, very intentional.
With a plan, yeah.
Yep, yeah.
So turn that question into a circular question for us.
Well, now circular is a whole other animal. It's a whole other animal, right? And this is also a challenging question because you have to think through all the parts. So I tease that it really should be called a triangle question because it's three parts. There we go. You can see that. And so maybe in the translation from the Italian in the Milan Tim to circular, it became circular when really it's a triangle. But it's really three parts. The person you're asking, commenting on the relationship of two others. So I would ask you, Illy, so describe for me the relationship between your husband and your child, right? So you're not in that relationship. You're an observer of it. Mm-hmm. So the rule is it can't be you. The question I'm asking, you can't be on the hot seat. So Illy, tell me about what happens when your husband and your daughter argue about what you tell your daughter to do. Mm-hmm. See, that puts you on the hot seat. Mm-hmm. So that would not count. That's a different kind of question, but it's not circular.
What would you call that question?
I would say that's a loaded question. Is what I would say. Okay. Yeah. That's a question looking for a fight.
Gotcha.
But a circular question is asking one person in the relationship of two others, and the two others don't have to both be people. It can be so Mom, tell me about how your husband gets along at work. Little brother, tell me about how Mom gets along, or the relationship between Mom and the church she goes to. Or little sister, tell me about how brother gets along at school, right? So it can be an institution, a hobby. It could be something else in that third position. It doesn't both have to be people.
I like this idea of thinking of it as triangles because we can do that pretty easily. But also with these questions, I think with any question, being attuned to not inciting conflict or issues, because I had a recent conversation with Elliot Connie, who said sometimes it's the therapist's fault that the clients get upset or leave huffy or start fighting. And so how we can notice those little linguistic things that we do that can cause a fight. So just being really intentional about in circular questions or relational questions that we're diffusing any conflict or tension rather than
unless you're inciting it for a very specific reason, like
Whitaker or
right or Gottman would have please have an argument so we can observe what happens, right? Or even structural, where doing enactments so we can see what happens. Sure. Again,
with a purpose.
Absolutely. And And it's a loose purpose. And that's, I think, is really important to understand, is one of the most influential things that I learned in graduate school was qualitative research, because qualitative research is not designed to change anything. I'm just supposed to find out what is. I think that if therapists took more of the stance of, let me find out what is before I go monkeying with it, then I'm going to be much more informed about what I'm going to monkey with. And I'm going to, and once I know what is, then I can ask the clients, what do you want me to monkey with? As opposed to, let me just go in, bull in a china shop and start, moving stuff around, which might not be remotely what they were interested in.
Right. And I think that's the perfect point where we can stop. So thank you, AnnaLynn, for giving us these guidelines and just summarizing the different questions for the audience. And we'll have you back again.
Good.